Welcome to Money Secrets with Bill and Mike.
I'm Bill Alexander.
And I'm Mike Tove. And Bill, today I think what we're going to cover is how do we connect with each other, right? I mean,
how does the lawyer and the financial guy connect?
Yeah, because people come to me and I refer them to you, and people come to you and you refer them to me, but there is a misunderstanding, I think, about when you need one, when you need the other, and how do we actually interact other than what they see us do here.
Well, you're exactly right, and it is so frustrating as a lawyer who puts together sophisticated plans for clients, how a financial advisor can screw those plans up.
Well, lawyers can screw up ours too, so.
Well, that's right, and so what's important is that they fit together, that the legal plan and the financial plan fit together.
Right.
That is a really important concept, so it'll be fun to share with folks this morning as to how sometimes they don't come together.
All right. Well, we'll be right back and we will get into it. Stay tuned. Welcome back. So, I get people come to my office all the time, and one of the things that I say, what's funny is that as a financial guy, one of the things I always have to say is that I cannot give out legal advice, I cannot give out tax advice, and of course I turn around and talk about legal issues and tax issues with the caveat that they have to go visit an attorney or a tax advisor.
And on the attorney side, it's similar. In fact, most attorneys would tell you that we're prohibited from giving out financial advice, but we get asked all the time about not just tax questions, which are certainly appropriate for us, but financial, how to invest, those kinds of things, which is not where most attorneys should be.
Right. So ultimately, I think what it really boils down to is recognizing that what we do is complementary to each other, or at least should be.
It should be, but so often it's not. And that there's so many disconnects because of the lack of the attorney and financial advisor working together. And I guess one of the most frustrating things for me, and as you know, I've been doing estate planning for over 40 years, and oftentimes we will put together plans that go beyond simplistic. In other words, we're trying to do asset protection planning, either for the spouse or for the children. We're doing long-term care planning, government assistance planning, or big one, tax planning, and I'll give you an example right out of the box. I had a client where the spouse needed nursing care. We got the spouse on Medicaid, so that was taking care of that. The husband, who was getting up there in years, had a nice account at the bank, over $300,000 in the bank. And the banker, unfortunately, said, why don't you do a POD, a pay on death, to avoid probate? Well, that sounded real good to Mr. Smith, but unfortunately, when he got Mr. Smith confused and had him sign this document, thinking that he was doing Mr. Smith a favor, the family actually lost over $100,000 because of what the banker did without coordinating with us as the estate planners. Because there's so many folks out there, whether they're bankers or financial advisors, they think that paying on death or transfer on death as a beneficiary type thing is always good. And the problem is that oftentimes it can actually hurt rather than help.
What's interesting, and I'm actually a certified estate planner, but that's actually on a financial planning side. And what's really interesting about that is that as I was going through my training with the National Institute of Certified Estate Planners, one of the things they kept harping on over and over and over again, and in fact, after we get our designation, we actually had to sign a form agreeing to the fact that we cannot practice law. And there were warnings about the unauthorized practice of law, and that if you give out legal advice and you're not a member of the state bar, there are very serious consequences. The point being that even though we are designated and called certified estate planners, when it comes to the estate planning law, we must work with a licensed attorney to complete those aspects of the plan.
Well, absolutely, and it's so important that there be a connection with the attorney, but the problem that we see so often is the fact that the attorney is working by themselves, and then the paperwork is signed, and then the client goes to the financial advisor, and there's never any communication between the two.
That's the operative word, though, isn't it?
Well, it is, and in fact, one of the most frustrating things for me, at not being the financial advisor, is that I will put together an asset protection plan, and then the financial, if we have an opportunity to review how the assets are actually invested, we often find that there's a disconnect between what the clients have told us their goals are and how their money is invested. Oftentimes, their money is invested solely in the markets, if you will, with equities that have a great deal of risk, whereas most retirees are risk adverse. They want safety, they want asset protection. Sure, they'd like a little upside, but they're much more worried about losing money in the markets. That's their greatest concern.
I think this is one of the things, and I spend a lot of time with clients talking about the fact that everyone wants three things: growth, safety, and liquidity access. Mm-hmm. And you really can't have all three perfectly in any one financial vehicle. You have to trade off one to get the other two. And as it turns out, there are three fundamental industries. The financial services world consists of three industries: banking, securities, and insurance. And each one of these industries more or less specializes in one of these two pairings. Mm-hmm. Diversification is not by owning a bunch of different products from one industry. It's by having different components within those pairings that meet specific objectives and goals.
And is consistent with the legal plan.
And is consistent with the legal plan. So let's take a short break. We'll be right back and talk a little bit more about some of these details. Stay with us. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Okay, so we were talking before the break about the fact that we do different things, but we are really working on two sides of the same problem, and it's not about me versus you or vice versa, but it's a team.
It should be, and it rarely is.
Okay, so let's separate the wheat from the chaff here. I get folks come into my office all the time looking for financial concerns, which fundamentally boils down to I want to get rid of risk, I want growth, I need income. I mean, it's literally, I want to grow my money for life without risk, then I want to spend it, and then I want to pass it all to the kids.
Sure, absolutely.
Which is fine, except...
And likewise, on our side, I have clients, most of my clients, they want to protect their assets for themselves, protect their assets for their spouse, and protect their assets for their children and grandchildren. And of course, there's some great ways to do that. Folks make mistakes all the time. It's not always about bad financial advice, although that comes into play. Sometimes it's the lawyer. One of the biggest mistakes, or at least from my own perspective, one of the things that's so frustrating is I'll have folks bring us revocable living trust to review. Well, I mean, I love revocable trusts as planning opportunities to give people asset protection for their spouse and children and grandchildren. And it also saves folks money. It's how do we take what we have and be able to enjoy it and then give it to whom we want, how we want to give it to them, when we want to give it to them, all at the lowest possible cost to the client. That's what a good estate planning is all about. But so often I will ask the client who is bringing it, okay, do you have all of your property held by your trustee? And they'll look at me with this blank stare like, what do you mean? And I'll say, well, let me look at your book. I guarantee you that the attorney has a letter in here that basically says, now that you've done executing your documents, you need to put all your property into your trust by transferring it to your trustee. And they'll say, oh, we don't remember that, or we thought we had done everything. And quite frankly, having a trust that's unfunded or where you haven't transferred everything to your trust is actually more expensive and more trouble for the client, because then you have to go through probate to get to trust administration. So you're paying double instead of less. And so it's the kind of thing where if you're going to, trusts are wonderful tools to use, and we use them all the time, but we make sure that our clients actually transfer their property.
Well, this is almost exactly the same thing that I advise clients with regard to their financial accounts, because fundamentally a trust, like an investment or any kind of a financial contract, is nothing more than a product. It is a physical entity that might be good or not, depending not on its label, but on how it's been structured, how carefully it has been determined in terms of a fit for that client, and all of those other variables. It's
right. And then, of course, it also has to do with when you put together a plan, then part of that planning should be how are your beneficiaries designated and all the different products out there that relate to that plan. And of course, as you know, that can be life insurance, it can be retirement accounts, or it can be annuities. Or any kind of insurance product. They have beneficiary designations, and you have to make sure that the beneficiary designations are consistent with the planning. Particularly if you have any kind of trust, whether it's, you know, sometimes we do will-based trust planning, and other times we do just regular outside the will, separate trust planning, revocable and irrevocable trust. But they're always assets that need the proper beneficiary designation. And so oftentimes I'll find that the financial advisors have different beneficiary designations and they need to be changed. And so there needs to be communication between the attorney and the financial advisor.
I think the challenge on this, and I think where this really becomes a problem, is that, certainly on my end, is that a lot of financial advisors, and I've heard this, regard attorneys as an adversary, thinking that if I send my client to the attorney, I'll never see the client again. And once in a while that happens. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. But there is this us versus them kind of an attitude. And the financial advisor, quite frankly, I think is looking out for his or her own interest, perhaps ahead of that of the client, by being protective and saying, you're all mine. I'm gonna keep you here. Nobody gets to touch you, because they're afraid of losing a sale.
Well, and I think that's true. And in fact, that segues into another very important topic to us, and that is attorneys have always had the obligation to their clients to give the advice to them that's in the client's best interest. And so We, as attorneys, we have a professional obligation, an ethical obligation, and a fiduciary obligation as an advisor to do what's in the client's best interest. Seems like that rule's coming over to the financial side of the world today.
Which is, yeah, the fiduciary rule, the Department of Labor's new fiduciary rule. And, you know, without getting into the nitty-gritty on it, because it was one of those concepts that sounded great on the surface, execution was perhaps not as good as it should have been, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, actually, Mike, I am delighted with the fiduciary rule because it just puts into play what clients have always expected. I know that when I go to a financial advisor, my expectation is that the advice is going to be in my best interest, and I think it's shocked people to learn that it's not always about what's in their best interest.
That's correct. And so we're going to come back and talk about this a little bit. And stay tuned, we'll be right back. Welcome back. So anyway, right before the break, what I was saying is that there have been some issues about implementation on this. That's really a burden for the advisors. But here's the thing, because I agree with you. When this thing first came down the pike, my thought was, what's the big deal? Because I have had a fiduciary responsibility for my clients going. In fact, when I started my agency, I started it with a fiduciary mission. I didn't even know that's what it was called at the time. It was so many years ago.
Yeah, but Mike, you're the exception to the rule.
Well, okay, so well, thank you, Bill, but I don't feel like I should be.
Well, you shouldn't be, and the Department of Labor in issuing this rule is trying to ensure that every financial advisor acts as a fiduciary in the client's best interest, whereas the old financial rule was simply, is an appropriate or inappropriate investment, which didn't necessarily have to be in the client's best interest. It just didn't have to be inappropriate for them.
What's funny about that is just a little over a week ago, I had a fellow who was telling me the following, that his financial advisor called him up and said, hey, we need to get together. There are some big changes in the tax law. And I'm going, what changes in the tax law? And it's like, oh, now, the fiduciary rule is not a tax law. True. But this had to have been what he was referring to. And I may be wrong, but it struck me that the only reason he's calling the guy up is because now all of a sudden he's under the gun to make sure that his advice fits the best interest contract that has new requirements under the law, and he has to make some quick changes before it takes effect so he doesn't get caught. And that's terrible.
Well, I think you're onto something, and in fact, I would simply say for those folks who are receiving calls right now about having to sign some new documents or changing from one investment to another, that's without any real explanation behind it. It may very well be because the investment, the prior investment, was not appropriate
right.
or would not meet the fiduciary rule today. And so I think that's probably something that people need to be asking their financial advisors about. It may be a reason for moving.
Yeah, well.
You know, it's the kind of thing where if your advisor has had you in investments where there was too big of a commission or too big of a sales percentage or whatever, which of course, as you and I both know, has happened a great deal, that maybe that's not the advisor for folks.
Well, so let's get into what's our money secret here then. I think I know.
Well, from my perspective, it really has to be that when you do financial planning or legal planning, that there needs to be a team involved. There needs to be both financial planning and legal planning done together.
But don't assume. Ask. Make sure that when you talk to your attorney, ask, do you have a financial planner that you work with? When you talk to a financial planner, do you have an estate plan, not a general practice attorney?
Right.
okay, an estate planning, a specialist attorney that you work with that can handle that other side of the equation. If nothing else, you need to establish the team up front before you start doing business with either.
Well, and any good attorney should be able to work with a good financial planner and vice versa.
So we'll be right back and we'll wrap it up. Welcome back. So I'm Mike Tove of AIN Services. We do the financial planning.
And I'm Bill Alexander with W.G. Alexander and Associates. We're attorneys who focus on estate planning, elder law, and asset protection. Plus, please join me on Saturday mornings at 11 o'clock on WPTF for my radio show, Asset Protection Today.
And remember, please join us in 2 weeks when we have a very special guest coming on. We know that you're going to look forward to it, enjoy it.
I'm excited about it.
Oh, I am too. So join us in 2 weeks when we surprise guest, and we'll see you then. Meantime, please keep watching.